So welcome everybody. Of course, why are we doing this? Because we all believe that combined transport is important, as also, let's say, proven by the current policy initiatives on the European level. On the agenda today, we have this morning session in which, of course, we will present the results of the combined transport report. We will also, amongst the people here around the table, debate on where do we stand, what are the challenges, and of course, with that, which are the opportunities for combined transport within the coming years. And of course, I would like to give also the floor to the two chairmen of UIRR and UIC next to me, so I'm very well, let's say, I would call it, accompagné. So here, so would like to give the welcome first to the chairman of UIRR, Ralph Charlie Schulze, to give the first words of welcome to everybody.
Thank you very much, Philip. Thank you very much to UIC for the good collaboration in the last years and also in the upcoming years. We decided to do again a report on combined transport because we are convinced that combined transport was, is, and will be the solution to achieve the Green Deal targets. And these targets are to double rail freight until 2050. And a doubling of rail freight until 2050 means a tripling of combined transport. We have a need to have a growth of 8 to 9% year on year to achieve these targets. So I think it will be very interesting to see where we are standing today in order to see what still has to be done in order to achieve our targets. We have started a campaign on combined transport for Europe, together with our partners, together with UIC, but also with the partners in the member states. And this campaign has shown until now that there will be a lot to do, and that in terms of energy efficiency, in terms of footprint of CO2, combined transport is really the solution. But of course, we also know, despite of this very optimistic and positive outlook, we have some new realities. We are confronted with these new realities. It's the war since the 24th of February. It is the energy cost situation, and it is also the poor quality due to infrastructure works. So today we are sharing the infrastructure with passenger freight, rail freight, and works, and we have to see how to define the right priorities. Today we will talk about the past mainly, about where we are standing today, but of course we'll try also to give a positive outlook for the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Also, of course, we are at the premises and at the headquarters of UIC. And of course, also a words of welcome from Eric Lambert, Chairman of the Special Group Combined Transport within UIC, at the special anniversary of UIC itself.
Yes, thank you, Philippe. Thank you, everybody, to come here. So that's my pleasure to welcome you. Is this UIC premises? This report is a special one because this year UIC is celebrating, as Philippe said, his 100-year anniversary. And so you may know the three values promoted by the UIC are unity, solidarity, and universality. The events of the last 2 years shown the essential role of the rail transport and even more of the combined transport. First, during the pandemic, when the border have been closed, and for the time being, in the context of the war in Ukraine. So this report shown that despite the challenging times that we have, the increase of volume in combined transport continues. Slowly the last years, of course, but constantly. This 8th edition is composed in 2 parts. The usual statistics, so the past, as said Charlie, but also spotlight on specific aspects that we have analyzed together with our partner TM Leuven. The first is the cost chain analysis in an end-to-end perspective. The second one is the digitalization model in combined transport. And also we will have the pleasure to hear our colleagues from Dassault speaking about digitalization on the logistic chain. And the last aspect, the revision of the weight and emission directive and the possible impact on the combined transport in the future. The combined transport report is a very important document because that's the only one we have on the European level explaining the development, the increasing of the volume, where we are, what are the future foreseen of the different actors of the logistic chain, so the expectation. Only for saying that the last report, so the report is published every other year. The last one, 2 years ago, has been downloaded more than 1,500 times from the UIC website. So that's the meaning of this report, more than 1,500 times download. So that I hope that you will enjoy the listening to the results of this actual report, and these results will be presented by our partner, TM Leuven. So, Tim, I give you the floor.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Indeed, we were contracted by UIC and UIRR to compile this year's combined transport report, which we were glad to take on. We at TM Leuven are a spin-off of the University of Leuven, a team of researchers from all different fields, from economic, from the engineering field. And so we took it upon ourselves to make this report as well as we could according to the highest standards. Okay, so a quick outline of my presentation. First, we'll go into a bit of methodology. How did we go about collecting the data? Then the actual data, the facts and figures that we found, the analysis that we did. And then, as Eric introduced, there have been 3 spotlight analyses this year on digitalization, on the cost chains, and on the ongoing review of the Weights and Dimensions Directive. So, methodologically, first, matter of definition. You all know combined transport, but there are a few definitions that we need to take into account. Multimodal transport, intermodal transport, and combined transport. They're sometimes used interchangeably, but they're not the same. Multimodal transport is transporting goods via different modes as a whole. Intermodal transport adds the extra layer of using a single loading unit. So the goods themselves are not handled, they are simply the loading unit that is moved from one transport mode to the other. And then combined transport puts the focus on the length of the different legs. So the focus should be on the sustainable leg, on the rail leg, on the inland waterway leg, and the road legs of the chain should be as short as possible. So which sources did we use? We used Eurostat, we used data from the UIRR member survey that is organized every 2 years, I believe. We had our own dedicated survey with stakeholders in the sector. We held a few workshops, and of course we reviewed literature. With regard to the Eurostat data, you see there's an asterisk next to that. Of course, this is a combined transport report. But Eurostat, with regard to combined transport report, has its limitations. In fact, Eurostat does not report combined transport data, it reports intermodal transport data. So there's already a sort of discrepancy there. In addition to that, Eurostat also does not necessarily have data for all countries regarding rail transport, regarding intermodal transport. Belgium isn't in there, Luxembourg isn't in there. For Austria, there are no intermodal data. UK, when they left the European Union, they stopped appearing in the data, so there are a few limitations there. And of course, new this year, something we looked into is to look at combined transport via inland waterways. So obviously, it's also part of combined transport, but we worked with the European Inland Waterway Transport Platform to get the data and to try and include them in this report. Okay, so we can dive into the facts and figures. So first of all, there's quite a bit of figures in the report. I'm just going to go through a few of what I thought were the most important, the most striking ones. So here you see the evolution of the modal split of freight transport as a percentage of ton kilometers. You can see that it has remained relatively stable over the past 10 years. There's no denying that. Road is at about 75%, inland waterways about 6%, and rail at about 16%. But underneath that, there are major differences between countries. Some countries have rail market shares of 40 to 60%. In others, it's less than 1%. Inland waterways obviously can only take place where they have navigable waterways. So in the Netherlands has an inland waterway market share of over 40%. In Romania, it's almost 30%. So there are major differences underlying these averages. That's important to note. And you see in the bar for 2020, we also made a split in the road transport based on the distance. So the barrier 300 kilometers is quite a crucial one. Above and below 300 kilometers, that is where there can be competition between road and combined transport. So this is something that a share of the market, of the road transport market, that could be interesting, that could be a potential market for combined transport as well. So you see that this is actually something showing the potential for combined transport in the future. Then let's have a look at how rail freight is performing on average versus how intermodal rail freight is performing. And as you said, the overall volume of rail transport is relatively stable. That it's over the past 10 years, 3% growth in ton kilometers, 1% decrease in tons. But the real star here is combined transport. It has grown by 50% since 2011. So you really see that the classic markets for rail have been in decline, whereas combined transport has really taken the load and has really grown strongly over the past 10 years, really holding up the market for rail freight transport. But here as well, there are a few interesting geographic differences that you see. Classically, rail freight transport is very strong in Eastern European countries, while that's less the case in Western Europe. But for intermodal transport, so the major growing market, you see that actually intermodal transport is performing, or combined transport is performing very strongly in those Western European countries, with market shares as a percentage of total rail freight of 25% upward. So there you see some countries it can go as high as 50%. Spain, Italy, Switzerland. Those are very important countries for combined transport, where it takes a very major part of the market. It also shows where there is further potential to grow for combined transport. Obviously, in Eastern Europe, traditionally very strong markets, but their combined transport has not really taken hold yet, but it could do so in the future. Then, just to provide an overall picture of the evolution of the different market segments. There's been a growth since 2011 of the overall freight transport volume of about 12%. And there you see immediately that growth of rail combined transport by 50% stands out as the major growth factor. Inland waterway transport as a whole has decreased, but combined inland waterway transport has still grown in absolute figures since 2011. So that shows that really combined transport is holding up the market for these sustainable transport modes. A few figures then specifically for combined transport. So here we see the development of unaccompanied combined transport over the past 10 years again, so since 2011 in million tons. Difference between the domestic market and the international market. In terms of size, they're very comparable, but the growth, very much the recent growth, has been in the international market. Since much of the growth, in fact, has been realized since 2015, and over the past 2 years, of the 50% overall growth, there's been 24% growth almost in that international market. You also see in the domestic market, there's the dominance of maritime combined transport, meaning goods that are coming in via major seaports and are then transported to the hinterland, whereas in the international market, the longer distance markets, it's mainly continental transport, so goods coming from within Europe that are being transported within Europe. A look at the major markets, the major corridors. In the domestic markets, largest corridors, Germany, Italy, France, which should come as no surprise. Those are geographically the biggest countries, so they have the largest potential for having domestic transport. However, on the international corridors, in rail combined transport, we see that the main corridors, Germany to Italy, Italy to Germany, Belgium to Italy, and vice versa, and the Netherlands to Italy. So it's essentially the main seaports in Europe that are moving goods to Italy, one of the industrial hubs of Europe. Between those countries, there's very little rail combined transport. However, if you look at the bottom figure, which is the combined transport via inland waterways, there you see what's happening with those goods that are being moved there. Major corridors, Germany to Belgium, Germany to the Netherlands, Belgium to the Netherlands. Those goods are being moved still, but they're not being moved by rail. They're being moved by river and by canal. The infrastructure is there. It's a net. The rivers are there. They're being used at great success. Okay. This one was another interesting figure that I wanted to show you. That is the distance of the rail leg. So that essentially is what makes combined transport. Put things on rail for as long as you can. And there you see 3 different graphs. The average rail leg in blue, the rail leg for international transport in gray, and for the domestic combined transport in yellow. What's striking here is that combined transport in principle has as its main market long distance transport, but there is in fact a very strong market for combined transport also at the shorter distances, 50 to 150 kilometers. There's a lot of combined transport. Over 15% of the market is in those short distance markets, which is for a large part indeed domestic transport from to and from seaports. But this is something in European policy, the focus is always on the longer distances, but short distance transport, combined transport also has an important place in the European rail freight transport market. So those are a few of the most important facts and figures that we found in the report. As I said, there's more in the report when it will be published. So let's move to the spotlight analysis. And the first one we looked at is digitalization in combined transport. There we looked at what are potential applications for this new technology in combined transport. So there's a few of them that were mentioned. This is mainly based on stakeholder consultation. So we had interviews, we had workshops on this. Some of the applications that came forward as the most interesting ones are digital capacity management. So really managing the infrastructure, managing it also from an operator point of view. tracking and tracing systems as a service towards customers, but also for the internal functioning of the operators. Electronic administration, managing the administrative process more fluently without requiring paper documents. And then from a more general perspective, digital automatic coupling, autonomous train operations. So this is not something that applies to combined transport. This goes for rail freight transport as a whole. There are other applications on which you can read in the report. Some of the main challenges that were highlighted by stakeholders, first and foremost, is obviously cybersecurity. Whenever there's an electronic system, it's susceptible to hack. That's online, that's plugged in. It's susceptible to hacking, especially in these times of I'll call it digital warfare. Those things are especially at risk. So this is going to be important for the future. However, at really the practice of digitalization in combined transport, one of the important aspects is having harmonized standards between all the stakeholders in the system, both horizontally and vertically, and having harmonized databases, so where people can draw information from to optimize their business, to make decisions on for the future. And an important consideration there is that all participants, all stakeholders will need to participate in that digital transformation. So everyone from the big players to the smallest terminal operator, everyone will need to participate and go digital and really try and do everything in electronic way, make sure that everyone is plugged into the system. And this is a bit of a roadmap that was drawn up by UIRR for digitalization in combined transport. Here you can see the different levels of action. First of all, there's the infrastructure layer and the railway undertakings who can use digital information for, as I said, digital capacity management, for planning, for scheduling, booking their equipment. At the operator level, it's the administrative process. It's using the data for planning, for optimal scheduling of loads of other modes as well. And then there's the regulatory level, which needs to bring everything together, really, which needs to provide the standards, which needs to provide the databases that support the system. So these are the main building blocks that need to be in place before it can progress. As we move further down in time towards, this timeline goes until 2030, we'll see to which extent these things can actually progress. But this is, as more details are added, more added value becomes available to the users. For the example, the IoT enhancements, small devices, for example, placed onto railway equipment, can tell them when exactly railway maintenance or equipment maintenance would be needed. Those small things can improve the reliability of the system, can improve the predictability of the system, and can provide added value to everyone involved, from the operators to the clients. So a lot of work remains to be done. There are a lot of steps to be taken, and it's a matter of coordinating and harmonizing everything together. Then we looked at a cost chain analysis. So it's always interesting to see what the business case is for combined transport. And there, as a first step, what we did was trying to identify which cost components that we're working with. This isn't rocket science, of course. You know what's going on. It takes there are fixed cost, variable cost, and semi-fixed cost. Fixed costs, equipment that needs to be purchased or leased. Insurance. There's general overhead to run the companies. In terms of variable costs, we have energy, a very crucial one in these times, of course. Infrastructure access costs, and handling at the terminals. And then in terms of semi-fixed costs, so we have wages for staff, and we have maintenance costs. Maintenance costs, to a degree, they are fixed in the sense that equipment, tracks need regular maintenance, but it also depends on the amount of usage. So the more they're used, the more they will need to be maintained. What we did in the analysis was look at a few corridors and try and see what the cost chain, what the different cost components tell us, and how they relate to each other. And we're going to go through one example here. For a corridor from Germany to Italy, I think we had Hanover to Verona. And there you see what are the different components of combined transport. The bulk of the costs is actually in the road leg of the combined transport chain. So despite the fact that it's shorter distance, it still takes up a considerable part of the total cost. When we look at the rail parts, there we see that the main cost aspects are in equipment, in track access, in energy, and in general overhead. Now, I have to say that in these cost figures were taken prior to the current crisis. So you can probably expect that this light green piece of the pie is substantially larger these days. But this gives you an overall picture for this specific case study. And if we see then how how combined transport performs in comparison to other modes, for this specific corridor, you see that combined transport can in fact be the most cost-efficient mode. This is an index. If road would cost 100, a pure rail solution would cost 82, but a combined transport solution would be the cheapest, 20% cheaper than road transport. So that I think supports the point that indeed combined transport is a very important part of the overall freight market. Then a final aspect that we looked at for the spotlight analysis was the ongoing review of the Weights and Dimensions Directive. So there are a few policies at the European level that are being reviewed at this moment. The Weights and Dimensions Directive is one of them. The Combined Transport Directive is another one. The Train Drivers Directive is another. So there's quite a few moving pieces right now. What's the Weights and Dimensions Directive? It essentially regulates heavy road vehicles, specifically for international transport, for cross-border transport. And there, the directive puts limitations at 16.5 meters for a standard tractor semi-trailer combination and 18.75 meters for a road train, which is essentially two smaller units, and puts the maximum weight limit at 40 tons. A general exemption for intermodal transport was introduced in 2015 to allow a higher weight, 42 or mostly 44 tons. So to compensate really for the tire weight of the container that is being used, so that it allows for the same load to be carried. But the directive also leaves the opportunity to individual member states to install exemptions and derogations, and many have made use of that. So some countries, including France, Belgium, Italy, have actually installed the 44 tons as a general rule. So it's not an exemption there for combined transport. All road freight transport can make use of that exemption, or even higher. There are countries that have 48 tons. There are countries that have 50 tons on current vehicles. Something that another potential derogation that's being used in a few countries are longer and heavier vehicles. So that's essentially a standard truck with an additional trailer attached to it, up to 25.25 meters long, 60 tons. This is a vehicle that was historically used in the Nordics, and those kinds of derogations really only entered the directive when those countries joined the European Union in 95. So these vehicles have been in use there for quite a while, but since then other countries have made trials with them, and for example in the Netherlands it has become part of the general traffic. So there are very few restrictions there to use it. Other countries have tested it. Spain, Portugal, Belgium, Germany, Czech Republic are all doing trials with these vehicles longer and heavier vehicles to some degree. And then the third exemption that's being used are longer semi-trailers up to 1.3 meters extra long, which is being used in Germany and Italy. This is mainly used for palletized transport, but it does add considerably to the loading capacity of those semi-trailers. So what are the potential impacts of these new vehicles should they become allowed in general use? First of all, for the vehicles themselves, there's an improvement in fuel efficiency. The 44-ton vehicles would bring a fuel efficiency improvement of about 5%, but longer, heavier vehicles could bring an improvement in terms of emissions per ton kilometer of up to 20%. For perspective, rail transport is about 60 to 90% more fuel efficient than classic road transport. So that's a positive point. However, there are a few points to be considered as potentially negative. Infrastructure is an important one. Heavier vehicles that drive over bridges, especially older bridges, especially longer bridges, there's an increased risk of damage, of collapse even. So additional maintenance to bridges would be required. And then if those heavier vehicles come with higher axle loads, which in some cases is inevitable, it would also bring extra damage to the pavements. The roads themselves the service life of those roads would decrease with the additional costs that come with it. And then another potential negative effect, that could come here is risk of modal shift. Now, modal shift it's a bit of a contentious subject, of course, and it's contentious because there's actually the evidence that's available on it is inconclusive. Countries that have used the longer, heavier vehicles say that there is no reverse modal shift, but of course, the problem in all of these cases is there's no baseline, there's no point of reference. What would have happened if those things had not been introduced? So there's really no evidence saying that there could be a modal shift or not. However, when we just look at the essence of what's happening, improved fuel efficiency will bring lower costs, and lower costs for roads will improve its competitive position. And in certain markets where road transport is competing with combined transport, where road transport is competing with combined transport, it's inevitable that it improves the competitive position of road, and there could be a modal shift on certain specific routes, specific lines. That's just an economic logic. So that's something definitely to be paid attention to during the upcoming legislative review process. And that's about what we found in our during our study. So we looked at a lot of data, we looked at a lot of literature, and these are the results. And I would still like to thank UIRR and UIC for the opportunity to perform the study.
Thank you very much, Tim, for this quite extensive explanation of the current combined transport report. The report itself will be available by the end of the month. So the full report in all its details will be published, available digitally by the end of the month. I think we worked. They did a pretty hard job and a pretty fast job, because it was done in almost around between, let's say, 6-7 months. Let's say compared to the other reports, I think that we've made a good methodological foundation also to build upon for next reports. What we also did is that we now have, let's say, more comprehensive report, as we are including a comparison with other modes of transports within the philosophy that we are not the only ones on the world, and that let's say comparing and maybe a bit benchmarking with other modes makes sense. And also in building up the statistical part, we opened some doors to new sources of data, which hopefully we will be able to use in future reports, which will make it even more, let's say, sound and well-founded than these ones already are. So we had there with a number of, let's say, also colleague organizations, very good discussions to, let's say, to couple databases also within the, let's say, in the era of working together and data sharing. I think we have laid there some good foundations, but that will be probably for next reports. But maybe before we go into a bit of debate within the different with the people, maybe are there any questions on the findings which TM Leuven just presented? So the floor is open to everybody. Are there any or remarks or suggestions or? I mean,
Thank you. I have a question regarding the legs of the rail for the short kilometers. Can you? Well, this one. It's quite surprising that there is a lot of figures of traffic for less than 200 kilometers. So, how do you explain that? If you,
well, these are probably. As you see, a very in that market, the short distance market, it's mainly domestic transport. So this is what we assume to be maritime transport. So it's essentially goods being picked up at main seaports and distributed to the direct hinterland of those seaports. So,
okay, thank you.
Yes, that's exactly what I think we have spoken yesterday during the executive committee of the Combined Transport Group with our members. So we have 16 members in this Combined Transport Group, and also the explanation we find out was exactly what Tim said. We say that most of these kilometers or most of these volumes are maritime container coming on the ports and then going directly with the train to the hinterland terminals. For example, in Belgium, you have the terminal in Athus. It's also 250 kilometers from Antwerp, from Zeebrugge. So we have a lot of such of terminal, interland terminal. So, but also it proved that also the need of combined transport in this market share is important. We all have heard the last 2 months, 3 months about congestion, the port congestion. Where the 20,000 TEU vessels have to wait because they cannot be unloaded on the quays. So that's exactly the market share from the combined transport where we are we are there, and it's not only speaking about when we speak about combined transport, speaking about long distance. Of course, this market is also very important, the long distance. That's what we have seen also in international, the growing international volumes. But also this market, from hinterland, from the ports to the terminal in hinterland is also very important and have not to be forgotten. With the next combined transport directive and so on, not forget this market. It's also very important for Europe. Thank you.
Yep, then in the back.
I have one question, one comment. First, a question regarding the digital automatic coupling. It was mentioned in the list of this one applications, but in the schedule, how important is that for combined transport? On the background, that most trains are shuttle trains, fixed combinations. It's not in the timeline. I haven't seen that mentioned again.
So the digital automatic coupling is an analysis ongoing. So we have a study ongoing. So we have this project DAC for EU. Not forget. So we are testing this for the time being. So we have done a lot of tests during the last 2 years with different technologies in Europe, and we are analyzing exactly the impact that will have on the time schedule for the formation of train and so on. So that's ongoing. It's today. It's not what I say the knowledge is not big enough to have answered about the impact on the market. It's ongoing, and I will invite you to follow on the 30th of November. So the international conference event organized by the colleagues from DAC for EU. So they will present the result of the 2 years study on the 30th of November. It will be online. So please then connect you on today in this day, and you will have some answer of the question.
And second, it's a comment.
If I may add, you're absolutely right. For intermodal, for combined transport, the DAC Prima Vista has no added value because we are running shuttle trains, and the automatic part of it doesn't seem to be so interesting. But of course, on a long-term view, what is important is the D in the DAC, is the digital automatic coupler. If we have a digital rail system, intermodal cannot be not part of it, so has to be completely included. So we are hoping that the D will be really the point, and also the electrification as a third component with automatic, digital and electrification. I think this is a reason why, as an intermodal sector, we observe this very closely. We are also in the steering group of the DAC. But your comment is absolutely right. Prima Vista, there's no real need. And I insist on the fact that if we choose a certain digital automatic coupler, it has to be compatible with all kind of wagons, also intermodal wagons, also pocket wagons.
It's just a second comment on the long and heavy road vehicle. In Germany, it's already a regulation for that, but limited to 40 tons and 25 meters. And we have done a study 15 years ago on that. The impact was about 30% of intermodal transport. In essence, it's not that impact by now because the volume is not that high. But on the other hand, it's not very fitting to intermodal transport due to the fact that that's a combination of the trailer, the long trailer and the short trailer is not fitting to the wagon dimension. So there is an operational problem with that.
Compatibility is key here. Yeah. So if the road invents longer, heavier, bigger vehicles which are not compatible with the other sustainable modes of transport, for me it doesn't make sense. So we really have to see that most of the loading units, most of the trucks have to be compatible with all modes of transportation. This should be the main aim. And I met the German Minister of Transport last week. He said 40 tons for cross-border should be the maximum. He only said, look at the state of the roads and the bridges. And of course, we have this position as UIRR that we say 40 tons should be the maximum. There can be exceptions. There can be rules for combined transport, 4 tons more, even 6 tons more if necessary. Like in France, there are some tests. But the rule on Europe for cross-border should stick to the 40 tons.
And if I may add something, it's also very important, the compatibility, of course. Also, the compatibility railroad has to be reinforced. And as you know, we have the revision of the Combined Transport Directive. And in parallel, we have also the revision of the weighted dimension directive. So in our point of view as railway undertaking, and it was also the position of the CER General Assembly in the end of September. So for us, it's really important to have these boards conduct parallel and together. So the compatibility is for us important and a higher priority when we will go further with the revision processes of the 2 directives. Very important, of course.
I just want to come back to the DAC discussion we just have. If we talk about the maritime flows, I disagree that the wagons are always together in a tight set. If we look on what's happening in Hamburg in Waltershof, which is Europe's biggest rail cargo station, there they shunt every day hundreds of wagons, and there the duck would bring an enormous benefit also in the time. And second, as I think we all agree that we should support the modal shift. We need the duck to get the reefer trucks on train. Without duck, this will not happen. This is a tremendous potential to grow.
This was exactly the electrification component. So we have electrification, we have digitalization, and of course automatic, which compared to single wagon loads is not as important in combined transport, but you're right, the hinterland, they have to build the train, so automatic coupler, if it's digital and if electrification as a component is added, we are in favor. That's why we are on the steering board there.
As you mentioned, Sia, I feel like I have to talk. I think you could not really indeed go any further than your conclusions because you are simply dealing with existing traffic, so that we cannot, I mean, we have to accept that this was the terms of requirements that you had to work with. And indeed, in the 3 countries where they are allowed, there may be also circumstances that make it absolutely unique. In Sweden, there's probably quite a few origin destinations that are not even considered or can be covered by rail or intermodal transport, so that solves it. In the Netherlands, the distances are rather short, so again, that makes the case. The only case I see is the one you mentioned in Germany, where as you had to handle national, mostly national, of course it was you were more into the shortest distances than on the longer ones, apart from Germany, indeed, where when it was tested on longer distances in your study 15 years ago, then it shows. So we have only a few examples, I mean, and that's a message to the people here. We have actually only a few examples where we can really demonstrate by seeing and looking at the figures that this happens. This is your study in Germany, or the study that was done by the Ministry of Transport. And there's another one which is based on simulations and modeling. And that's the only thing we can do if we do not have the concrete. The only thing I can think of, I mean, and if you have other ideas or other studies at national level that look at simulation and modeling on long distance, the only one I know is the Fraunhofer study, where really on corridors, and I think in this case they strictly took traffic on railway corridors. So you knew automatically that there was an alternative that would be rail, and here on long distances it's quite clear that the shift is major. But in your case, I can understand you are limited to national, domestic, privileging short distances, and also in those countries where it's implemented, the circumstances are so peculiar that it's certainly difficult to demonstrate it on true figures, so that I can understand. But certainly, as we are preparing for the revision of the weight and dimension, it's important that we point to these studies, whether based on real cases or on modeling, to make, because the demonstration is pretty clear. And of course, you mentioned something that is a technical restriction, which is if we do not have the right combinations, I mean, we don't fit them on the wagon. So we have also, as railways, to think, I don't know whether it was research in your part, which are the combinations that even if you do 25 meters or close to, which are the right combinations that we are sure can be rail compatible. That's, I mean, probably UIRR is more expert on that than even we are. So that's an invitation for us to carry on the reflection in that frame.
So speaking about speaking about the composition of the trailers and the vehicles, there is a project ongoing. On the European level. The name of this project is ZEFES, Zero Emission for Efficient Supply Chain. So that's a project launched by the road sector, involving all the big players in the road sector. And so there are a lot of aspects that they will study. One of these is the composition. So what would be the best composition of the trailers in regards with the needs, the market needs. Another one is electrification and so on. So there are a lot of aspects that they will be analyzed and studied in this ZEFES project. And also, I want to mention here, to assure the compatibility with the railway, the UIC is also involved in this project. So the project, it's about analyzing 12 different use case in Europe. Different composition, so 12 different use case. And 2 of these 12 use case are with combined transport. And the UIC, the colleagues of the railway system are involved in this project. So something is ongoing to answer on the remark you have done.
And when is it supposed to be?
So the time frame is it will begin in 2023. So there will be a presentation. I think next week in Lisbon, in Portugal, there will be an innovation event, and they will present exactly the project. They will begin on the January 2023, duration 2 years. Okay, so but we are involved as combined transport, so we are also involved with this project. But it will be very interesting to follow this work into this project, because if we not pay attention, the results could be very difficult for the railway. Please, Aurelia.
Yes, just one short questions about terminals, because you didn't speak about terminals on your presentations. Is there anything in the report about these topics? Because I think it's a very important topics, especially in France. Did you study for example, the need for new terminals in Europe or something like that?
No, that wasn't part of this instance of the report. I think it was covered in previous versions. But
there was a spotlight on terminals in the last report, so there is also an extrapolation on the future. But in this report, we had other spotlights. We cannot redo it every time. But you are absolutely right that terminals are crucial for combined transport.
If there are no more questions, then I think it's an ideal opportunity to go a bit more, let's say, into debate on the conclusions of the report by the organizations, and also by our partners, Dassault and Hermeva, to see what they are thinking. And maybe I would like to start with presenting Mrs. Kool, who is the Vice President of Business Services at the Dassault Systems. And maybe a bit looking back on the last 2 years, and also what we have presented here within the report, it shows the importance of digitization. And I assume that you have quite some things to tell there.
Thank you. Perhaps maybe just a very quick kind of introduction of Dassault Systems. Perhaps you know us more for the aviation side of the business, but we are actually in 11 industries. I work on a global basis. Within business services, I'm covering rail freight as well as financial services. That's obviously not a question here. The great thing about working for a company, and it's a software company, we're one of the largest in Europe, is that the exposure that we get from other industries, what is the aerospace industry doing? What is even life sciences doing? What is consumer packaged goods doing? Leveraging some of the knowledge, the best practices, and even the technology from those other industries to bring them into areas that, or industries in particular, rail, that are going through these transformations, really kind of help we've helped many of our customers do that. So with regards to digitalization, of course, there's the basics of digitization, and rail, the rail industry is no different to some of the other industries that we work with in terms of manual processes, siloed systems, kind of very fragmented, lack of standards, and so on. This is something that I think every industry has gone through. And digitalization of bringing in the right applications, an integrated approach, having some standards that are, especially with the change of many business models out there, and this combined transport of connecting different organizations with different semantics and taxonomy. So without going into too much detail, digitalization is absolutely a must, and then moving on to transformation, and I'll be talking a little bit more about that in the afternoon.
Thank you very much. Maybe Eric Lambert, because we have Eric Feyen at UIRR, but we have Eric Lambert here. It's always very nice to have two Erics in one meeting. Easy actually also, but so what do you, Eric? Do you retain, let's say, from the period from the last 2 years actually, and at this first physical events? What do you see? What are the conclusions from the past, let's say, 2 difficult years?
Yes, thank you, Philippe. The conclusion we have already mentioned. 2 things: that the international transport volume are always growing. Of course, with the difficult time we had with pandemic, as I mentioned before, the pandemic and Ukraine war, and also for all the difficulties. So the growing was slowly as we have expected. When we take into account the last report, the expectation of the market was about having a growing around 10%. So we have seen that we are all about 3%, I think so. But okay, there are also causes there, and we cannot go without taking this into account. But the message is clear. The combined transport has become really the first market on the railway sector, and that's the clear message. We see also on the market the willingness from the players, from the shippers, to use the combined transport. They are asking for how to do it, and so that's really a change. Last report I said 2 years ago, the mental shift will drive on the modal shift. And we are exactly here for the time being. So we are exactly there. The mental shift is coming. And we have to be aware, and we have to be prepared. So that's the next for the future. We have to be prepared for this mental shift going to the modal shift.
And from the operator side, from the terminal side, sorry.
Not only from the terminal side, but from the CT operator side and from all the customers behind side, what we see is that the shippers who have their environmental targets and their social responsibility targets are more and more interested in going towards intermodal. And this, of course, gives us hope. Today we have 50% market share, I would say, within the rail freight system for combined transport. And as the shippers are pushing, and the logistics service providers are also pushing, as CT operators and terminals, we have to prepare ourselves for this growth. And as I said in the beginning, what we need is a yearly growth of 8 to 9% in order to achieve the tripling of combined transport, which would be needed in order to have in 2050 really zero carbon combined transport and the right share in order to be the solution of the Green Deal. So what I can say is that last year was a very, very good year. This year we have to face new realities which we were not necessarily expecting. We have to deal with it, we have to go through it, but there still is a great enthusiasm and optimism on the shippers' side, because they really want to give themselves this green note, and that's why they try to convince their suppliers, the logistics service providers, to do more intermodal. But I always say they cannot only delegate it to the logistics service providers, they also have to adapt their processes. But I think this mental shift, which was just said by Eric, this is what we need. But it is there, and we have to be careful that the new reality is not killing all these efforts.
Yeah, thank you. And so we then maybe a little bit looking at the future. Where do we really need to work on, and what will the future bring us? Rick.
So as you have on your slide, challenging times. So we are exactly on challenging times for the time being and also for the future. One of the big concerns we have today as railway undertaking is the energy price. So that's really a big issue we have. The energy price is increasing. And not only that, but also there is a huge disparity between the national aids for the fossil fuels, one side, and the aid for electricity cost, the other side. So we see that a big disparity. And due to this situation, so we come to a Ubuesque situation somewhere in Europe, where some railway undertaking are returning back on diesel traction, where they used the electricity for hauling the trains because of the price level. And this cannot continue. That cannot continue. So that, in our point of view, as UIC Combined Transport Group, the 27 member states must agree on a harmonization of the aids between fuel and energy, electricity, and also between European.
If I may add to this, diesel price had an increase of 70%. The electricity for rail an increase between 300 and 1,000%. So you see already the difference. This is a huge challenge. And one of the customers of combined transport asked me 2 weeks ago, why do we have 4 different transparencies? Meaning that the 4 suppliers came with different arguments to explain the necessary price increase. So there is a situation which is not sustainable. We have to try to come to a harmonized solution in Europe. We will make, together with the GTC, a recommendation, a best practice recommendation in order to solve the issue, so that the Commission really, on Europe's side, at least recommends something to the member states, but at the end of the day, it will stay the decision in the member states. So we have to be convincing, Eric.
Yeah, and if I can add just on the operational side, I mean, we know that there are huge number of problems out there, right? With all the rail strikes that we're seeing, efficiencies in rail need to be improved significantly. So that whole move towards digitalization, having an integrated approach to deal concurrently with, the infrastructure, right the way through from fleet, crew planning, fleet planning, network planning, that needs to be kind of a completely concurrent approach, because that's basically how it happens. So, how we got to deal with those kind of challenges that we're seeing out there is something that really needs to be addressed across the industry.
We had a deep dive in the report, or we have a deep dive in the report on digitization, or on digitalization, or even digital transformation, depending on which word you want to use. We also mentioned a few of the, let's say, the preoccupations which were mentioned by the sector. Do you see the same things, or which you're working on? And is there any, let's say, if we would have to choose one, which one would you choose? Would you go for the DAC, or for the DCM, or for the or maybe for all of them?
All of it.
All of them?
Absolutely, all of it, all in good time. I think the first, maybe I'm biased on this, being from the services side of the industry. Ensuring kind of when we look globally at what is happening, in the US, the rail industry almost came to a shutdown. Crews, rail crew people, rail workers were absolutely unhappy with the situation. We see it everywhere, right? We see it in the UK, we see it in Europe. So sort of that's the first port of call, right? So on the roads, when we talk about roads, there's huge shortage of drivers. There's a huge drive towards that modal shift to rail from a net zero perspective. So, we've got to deal with things that are imminent right now, which is issues with helping workers, and again, we see that across the industry, different working conditions. People want a better working life balance, and that's something that has to be addressed in the rail industry. And then, of course, on the operational efficiency side, you mentioned terminals, right? Terminals and yards tend to be a real kind of in a black hole, if you like, where often there's not any planning, no planning of shunting, no planning of the rail yards and whatever, and scheduling and so on. It's usually left as a kind of sideline, but that's actually one of the main reasons why network disruptions occur. So these are things that need to be dealt with as well.
Thank you. Another topic that was addressed in the report was the weights and dimensions, which is very high on the policy agenda within Europe. Tim already presented some of the, let's say, the circumstance or the framework in which we are working, with a lot of exceptions and whatever. Eric, what is the vision of the RUs on this topic, and where should we focus on?
Yes, in the point of view of the railway undertaking, so we have to pay attention on what is ongoing. So what will be the new processes, the new procedure. We have to be involved in this procedure anyway. Well known that this weight and dimension directive is a road sector directive, but we cannot forget the combined transport in this discussion, in this procedure. So that as UIC, as standards and harmonization, technical point of view, it's very important not to forget the combined transport, as I was mentioned before, not to forget the compatibility with the rail sector, so that in our view, as I mentioned before, also it was the position paper from CER agenda, the General Assembly in the end of September. In our point of view, both directive are to be handled, to be conduct together in parallel, combined transport directive and weight and dimension, to assure that the compatibility road rail will not be forgotten and will be reinforced and not forgot.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. And from the point of view of UIRR?
From the point of view of the customers, of course, I can only agree with Eric, because you cannot look at the CT directive without looking at the weights and dimensions directive, and vice versa. Why? Because there is a definition of intermodal in the Weights and Dimensions Directive, and there is a definition of combined transport in the Combined Transport Directive, and we would like to see something much simpler than we have today, and something where there is no interpretation. The actual definition of combined transport in the CT Directive, which is the nearest appropriate terminal, is always interpreted in different ways. So we need clear business criteria, or we need a complete different definition. Today, the expectation of the Commission is to go towards a definition based on calculators. But of course, if the calculator is only a CO2 calculator, this would not be enough. We also have to integrate all the other external costs, the other externalities, because in order to achieve a level playing field between the different modes of transport, we have to stop thinking in silos. And don't forget, they are in the greening freight package 5 legislations. There is the CT directive, there's weights and dimensions, which are very closely linked one to each other. There's rail freight corridors, there's count emission, again linked to CT directive, and there is the train drivers directive. So we really have to see all this package as a whole, and we expect a first proposal of the Commission by mid of April next year, and we know that there will be elections in 2024. European elections under the Belgian presidency, and there will be elections in Belgium at that time. So not easy times. I hope that at least the first reading in the Parliament will be possible before the end of this period. But it's really important to see the context of all these legislations, because all of them will have a direct impact on our sector.
Closely involved is, of course, also CR, who's already waving. You have the mic already.
I have the mic already. Yes, yes. Well, first of all, I should have had actually a meeting with Jean-Louis Colson this morning. So, but I privileged the combined transport. Yes. So, and we'll see. I mean, I have to fix again an appointment with him together with the combined transport, because I want to have them both just to go through at least the few ideas we have. So that's ongoing. And as I'm talking also to them, I wait until they finished. So that's really a continuous process for CR. Maybe what I want to tell you, and that's, I mean, basically I'm talking also to you all, because we will need you really to provide the arguments, probably part of the arguments. And I think the one arguments that we will need before this study is finished, because if it's finished in 2 years, well, you're right. Probably with the elections, it's going to be 3 years before this directive comes out. But most of the discussions, and maybe the first reading, will happen in the next... it could start already before the election. Yeah, it will. So I don't know whether the results of your study will be ready at the time we'll need them. So as long as we do not have them, I think we already have ideas of the kind of weights and dimensions that could actually optimize combined transport and not cannibalize combined transport and rail, single wagon as well. So we have to think a bit also. I mean, I know it's not your main concern, but this is a concern that we as the railways have to think of. I think actually the Fraunhofer study shows that on the long distance, the gigaliners can cannibalize more single wagon even than combined transport. So I think it varies with corridors, but the risk is as high for conventional rail. And on your argument regarding energy efficiency, look, guys, right now everyone is panicking to get energy supply. I think almost for our sake, CO2 emissions, okay, it's a nice to have, but really now we have actually to argue a lot, strongly about energy efficiency And because even, at the high-level freight meeting, we had Christian Schmidt there, and he admitted, at some point, people, once the plane takes off, it remains, in the air a while, but at some point it has to land. And now we are in the landing space, where actually even the Commission just say, look, in times of scarce energy, it's difficult not to consider a transport system without rail being a central solution. So it's quite clear now that if we have to argue on something beyond CO2, look, now they are ready actually just to exploit coal again. That's energy efficiency, which is really the big argument to pull.
But in order to achieve it, just for information, Christian Schmidt went to your event the day before he was on the roadside. He said exactly the same to the road, which I accept, which is not my point here, because every mode of transport can be championed on its own, has to be as green as possible, has to be as efficient as possible, but the combination of both is another dimension. And if we forget this combination, this even higher efficiency through the combination, we are totally wrong. So let's stop thinking in these silos. Let's really bring it together.
Of course, what I'm saying is in line also with you. It's not contradictory. Even actually, it's really an extra argument. But we have really just to get to that point where really energy efficiency is the big
energy
thing
efficiency is the key for everything. But if we want to achieve the zero carbon combined transport in 2050, we have to start yesterday.
Yeah.
So and energy efficiency is a big part of it. In
I meant energy.
I
energy
understand.
Efficiency of the total chain, not of each mode, of course.
Absolutely understand. Door to door, this is the key. For your information, in our CT for Europe campaign, we will have the presentation of the third study on the 30th of November. So our European Intermodal Summit will be on the 30th of November from 10 to 12:30. And in this event, we will present the third study on zero carbon combined transport and what investment will be necessary until 2050 in order to achieve zero carbon combined transport. So what does it cost? I think this is really an important issue.
I would like to emphasize this for a company like Ermeva, the weight and dimension aspect is absolutely crucial. We decided to invest heavily in new wagons and we need to be sure that they have the right dimension to carry the containers or the trucks. And our business model is well known, so we have to lease them out at least for the next 32 years. And there also, Ralf Charlie, we hope that you are our voice in Brussels so that they don't take the right decisions.
We are, and compatibility is key, yes.
And also something interesting as information for you, in end of June, during the Connecting Europe Days in Lyon, Ralf Charlie and myself, we have then discussed with Mrs. Raluca Marian from IRU Association about all these topics, compatibility, combined transport, and so on. And we have then convinced Mrs. Marian to come to Bettembourg, so Luxembourg, and to visit our terminal in Bettembourg. So next week, Charlie, myself, and we will have the pleasure to meet once again Mrs. Marian in Bettembourg and try to convince also the IRU about the needs for combined transport and the utility for everybody. So there is place, as Charlie said, there is place for everybody, and that we have to work together for our future.
And thank you very much. Of course, if there are any questions,